July 3rd, 1793. The Temple Prison, Paris. A mother sleeps beside her 8-year-old son in a cramped prison tower. Outside their door, revolutionary guards pace stone corridors, their boots echoing against walls that once housed French royalty. Inside, Marie Antoinette has finally found a few hours of peace, her arm draped protectively over Louis Charles, her last remaining son. She doesn't know that in exactly 60 seconds, 6 municipal guards carrying an official decree will burst through that door. She doesn't know that what happens next will destroy her in ways the guillotine never could. This isn't a story about an execution. You already know how Marie Antoinette died. Guillotine, October 16, 1793, cheering crowds. History books love that dramatic ending. But what they don't tell you is what the revolutionaries did to her before they killed her. Because here's what most people don't understand about Marie Antoinette's death. The blade was mercy. The real torture started 76 days earlier, in the middle of the night, with the sound of boots on stone and a mother's scream that witnesses said echoed through the entire prison. Let me take you back to that room. July 3rd, 2 a.m. The door crashes open. Marie Antoinette jolts awake, her heart already racing because nothing good happens at 2 a.m. in revolutionary Paris. 6 men in tricolor sashes flood into the small chamber where she's been imprisoned with her 2 children, 14-year-old Marie-Thérèse and 8-year-old Louis Charles. One guard holds a paper, an official decree from the Committee of Public Safety. The room has 4 guards stationed in corners. They're always there, watching, recording every moment of the former queen's imprisonment. But these 6 men are different. They've come with a purpose. The guard begins reading. Legal language, revolutionary jargon, words like corrupting influence and enemies of the Republic. Marie Antoinette's French is perfect now. She arrived from Austria at 14, barely speaking the language, but 23 years as Queen of France taught her every nuance. She understands exactly what they're saying. They've come for her son. Louis Charles stirs, confused, still half asleep. He's 8 years old. He was born in Versailles, when his mother was still queen, when the world made sense, when he was still the Dauphin, heir to the French throne. Now he's prisoner, just like his mother. Marie Antoinette's body moves before her mind fully processes. She throws herself between the guards and her sleeping child. Her daughter, Marie-Thérèse, is awake now, too, watching in horror as her mother, who has maintained dignity through a year of imprisonment, through her husband's execution, through daily humiliations, completely unravels. No! That's all Marie Antoinette says at first. Just no. But the way she says it, witnesses would later describe it as a sound barely human. A mother protecting her young, primal, desperate. The guards move forward. They have their orders. Louis Charles needs to be re-educated by the Republic, separated from his mother's royalist influence. The boy is confused, frightened, starting to cry. He doesn't understand what's happening. Why are these men in their room? Why is his mother screaming? Marie Antoinette grabs Louis Charles, pulls him to her chest. The guards try to pry her fingers away, and that's when she truly fights. This woman who has been cooperative, submissive, broken by the death of her husband, King Louis XVI, 7 months earlier, she transforms into something the guards weren't prepared for. She scratches, she kicks, she uses her body as a shield. For 1 hour, 60 full minutes, Marie Antoinette refuses to let them take her son. Marie-Thérèse would later write about this night in her memoirs, how her mother's screams echoed, how she begged, how she promised anything if they would just leave Louis Charles with her. But this is revolutionary France. Promises from former queens mean nothing. The guards outnumber her 6-1. Eventually, inevitably, they win. They rip Louis Charles from her arms. The boy is screaming, "Maman! Maman!" as they carry him out. Marie Antoinette collapses. Not fainting, that would be too kind. She collapses the way a building collapses when its foundation is destroyed.
She's still conscious, which makes it worse. She can hear her son's cries fading down the corridor, getting fainter, until there's nothing but silence and the sound of her own sobbing. Marie-Thérèse is sitting frozen in the corner, watching her mother break. What the guards don't tell Marie Antoinette, what she won't discover until much later, is where they're taking Louis Charles. Not to a nice foster family, not to a comfortable re-education center. They're giving him to Antoine Simon, a cobbler, a radical revolutionary specifically chosen for his cruelty, his loyalty to the Republic, and his complete lack of sympathy for royalty. Simon's job is simple: break the boy. Make him forget he was ever a prince. Turn him into a weapon against his own mother. But Marie Antoinette doesn't know this yet. All she knows is that her son is gone. Her husband is dead. And something tells her, that mother's instinct that never lies, that she will never hold Louis Charles again. She's right. What happens to Louis Charles in the coming weeks is so disturbing that even hardened revolutionaries will later express regret. And what happens to Marie Antoinette is a masterclass in psychological warfare, how to destroy a human being slowly, methodically, using the thing she loves most as the weapon. This is the story they don't teach in history class. This is the 76 days before the guillotine. This is what it looks like when revolution becomes revenge, when justice becomes cruelty, when a mother loses everything piece by piece until there's nothing left but the waiting for death. Let's rewind, because to understand what they took from Marie Antoinette that night, you need to understand what she still had left. It wasn't much. Marie Antoinette in July 1793 wasn't the queen you picture from paintings. No elaborate wigs towering 3 feet high, no silk gowns worth more than most French citizens earned in a lifetime, no jewelry, no powder, no pretense. She was 37 years old, but looked 50. Her hair had gone completely white from stress. She wore a simple black mourning dress, the same one, day after day, because she was mourning her husband, King Louis XVI, guillotined on January 21st, 1793. They'd made her children watch the execution preparation, not the actual beheading. Even the revolutionaries drew that line. But the children saw their father dragged away at 5 a.m., saw their mother collapse, understood that Papa was never coming back. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of imprisonment in the Temple, a medieval fortress in Paris that had been converted into a prison specifically for the royal family. The same tower that once symbolized royal power now held what remained of the monarchy. But Marie Antoinette had adapted. Humans are remarkably adaptable, especially mothers. She created routines, morning prayers with her children, lessons for Louis Charles. She taught him to read, to write, kept his mind active. Afternoons with Marie-Thérèse, preparing the girl for a future that seemed increasingly unlikely.
The guards watched everything, recorded conversations, monitored their meals. The National Convention wanted documentation of every moment, evidence that could be used later, twisted into accusations of conspiracy. Marie Antoinette knew they were being watched. She'd learned to speak carefully, to show no emotion that could be weaponized against her. When Marie-Thérèse asked about her father, Marie Antoinette's answers were measured, appropriate, designed not to give the guards ammunition. But with Louis Charles, she couldn't help herself. He was 8, still young enough to need his mother's embrace, to wake from nightmares needing comfort. She would hold him and whisper that everything would be fine, even though both of them knew it was a lie. Louis Charles had been born in Versailles on March 27, 1785. His birth was celebrated across France, finally a male heir after his older brother's death. Cannons fired, bells rang, the Dauphin had arrived. Now, that same child slept on a straw mattress in a prison tower, heir to nothing. Marie Antoinette's other children haunted her too. She'd given birth to 4 who survived infancy. Her oldest daughter, Marie-Thérèse, was still with her, but her first son, Louis-Joseph, had died in 1789 at age 7 from tuberculosis. Died just as the revolution was beginning, as if he could sense what was coming and escaped early. And her youngest, Sophie, had died as a baby. So out of 4 children, only 2 remained by July 1793. 2 children she could still protect, still love, still mother, despite the guards and the watchers and the hatred of an entire nation. That's what Marie Antoinette had left. Not power, not wealth, not even dignity. The guards had stripped that away months ago with their constant surveillance, their crude jokes, their deliberate disrespect. She had her children. That's it. 2 human beings who still needed her, still loved her, still called her Maman. The revolutionaries understood this perfectly. They'd spent months studying her, watching her, identifying her weaknesses. They saw how she lit up when Louis Charles laughed, how she held Marie-Thérèse's hand during storms, how she became most animated during lessons, during playtime, during those brief moments when she could pretend they were just a normal family. They saw her humanity, and they knew exactly how to use it against her. Because here's what the French Revolution had become by mid-1793. It wasn't enough to execute enemies. The guillotine was efficient, but impersonal. The Committee of Public Safety wanted more. They wanted public confessions, wanted the condemned to admit their crimes, wanted to justify the bloodshed with proof of guilt. With Marie Antoinette, they had a problem. She maintained her innocence, maintained her dignity, even imprisoned, even widowed, even stripped of everything. She refused to break. So they decided to break her. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. First, take the son, use the boy to extract testimony against the mother. Create charges so horrific that even Marie Antoinette's sympathizers would turn against her. Then, when she was completely isolated, completely destroyed, put her on trial and watch her crumble. They selected Antoine Simon carefully. He wasn't just any revolutionary. He was a true believer, someone who saw the royal family not as fallen aristocrats, but as active threats to the Republic. Someone who had no qualms about doing whatever necessary to turn an 8-year-old prince into a weapon. Simon's instructions were clear. Make Louis Charles forget his royal birth. Teach him revolutionary songs. Force him to wear the red Phrygian cap of liberty. And most importantly, get him to testify against his mother. Whatever it took. Marie Antoinette knew none of this on the night of July 3rd. When they took Louis Charles from her arms, she believed it was punishment, cruelty, typical revolutionary hatred of royalty. She didn't yet understand that her son wasn't just being taken, he was being weaponized. In that small room in the Temple Tower, as Marie Antoinette collapsed and Marie-Thérèse watched in horror, the machinery of psychological warfare had just begun its work. The guillotine would come later, 76 days later to be exact. But the real execution started that night, with a mother's scream and a boy's cries fading down a dark corridor. What they did to Louis Charles in the weeks that followed would make even hardened revolutionaries uncomfortable. And what it did to Marie Antoinette would transform her from a queen into something history had never seen before. A mother publicly, systematically destroyed by the state using her own child as the instrument of torture.
Louis Charles was taken to a room 3 floors below his mother's chamber, close enough that if he screamed loud enough, maybe she could hear, far enough that she couldn't do anything about it. Antoine Simon was waiting. Picture Simon, a 50-year-old cobbler with rough hands and rougher politics. He'd spent years in poverty while royalty lived in Versailles luxury. He'd watched his fellow Parisians starve while the king and queen hosted elaborate parties. And now the revolution had given him the perfect assignment: reshape a prince into a patriot. Or destroy him trying. The room they gave Louis Charles was small, dark, and deliberately chosen for its windowless isolation. Where his mother's chamber at least had bars letting in daylight, this cell had nothing. Just stone walls, a thin mattress on the floor, and the constant presence of Simon. The first night, Louis Charles cried for his mother, natural reaction for an 8-year-old ripped from the only parent he had left. He called out, "Mama, maman," until his voice went hoarse. Simon let him cry, let him exhaust himself, let him understand that nobody was coming. Then the re-education began. Day 1, Simon removed Louis Charles' clothes, the simple but clean garments his mother had carefully maintained, and replaced them with ragged revolutionary dress, a red Phrygian cap, the cap of liberty, the cap that symbolized everything his parents had been executed or imprisoned for opposing. Louis Charles refused to wear it, still had some fight in him, some memory of who he'd been born to be. Simon beat him. Not severely enough to cause permanent damage, they needed the boy functional, but enough to teach him that refusal had consequences. Day 2, revolutionary songs. Simon had a whole repertoire of anti-monarchy anthems, songs that called Louis Charles' father a tyrant, songs that celebrated his execution, songs that described his mother in terms so vile that the 8-year-old couldn't fully understand them. He just knew they were bad. "Sing," Simon commanded. Louis Charles shook his head, pressed his lips together. His mother had taught him dignity, taught him that words mattered, taught him that some things were more important than comfort. Simon withheld food. 1 meal, 2 meals, 3 meals. When you're 8 years old and growing, hunger becomes everything. It crowds out pride, crowds out loyalty, crowds out everything except the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. On the 3rd day without food, Louis Charles sang. His voice was quiet, broken, ashamed, but he sang the words they wanted, words about liberty and equality and the evil of kings, words that betrayed everything his parents represented. Simon smiled. Progress. Week 2 brought harder lessons. Simon started coaching Louis Charles on specific phrases, specific accusations. He would ask questions. Did your mother meet with Austrian ambassadors? Did she send France's money to her family? Didn't she do things that hurt you? Louis Charles, confused, exhausted, terrified, started nodding. Easier to agree than to argue. Easier to say yes than to face another night alone in the dark, another day without food, another beating. The human mind is fragile, especially a child's mind, especially if that child has been traumatized by revolution, by his father's execution, by imprisonment, by separation from his mother. Louis Charles couldn't distinguish between reality and the stories Simon was building anymore. Within 3 weeks, he was reciting accusations on command. Within 4 weeks, he believed them. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Marie Antoinette knew nothing specific, but she knew everything that mattered. She couldn't hear Louis Charles' screams. The stone walls were too thick. She couldn't see his deteriorating condition. She couldn't know that her son was being systematically brainwashed to testify against her. But she was a mother, and mothers know when their children are suffering. She stopped eating properly. The guards recorded this in their daily reports, how the former queen picked at her meals, how she lost weight rapidly, how she spent hours staring at the door as if willing it to open and return her son. Marie-Thérèse tried to comfort her mother, but what comfort could a 14-year-old offer? She'd lost her father, watched her brother be torn away, and now watched her mother slowly unravel. The girl was drowning herself and couldn't throw a rope to anyone. The guards saw all of this, wrote it down, reported it to the Committee of Public Safety. The psychological warfare was working exactly as planned. July became August, 1 month since Louis Charles had been taken. Marie Antoinette marked the days somehow, scratches on the wall maybe, or just the counting in her head. 30 days without holding her son, 30 nights wondering if he was warm, if he was fed, if he remembered that she loved him. She didn't know that Simon had moved to phase 3 of the plan, extracting testimony. By early August, Louis Charles was so broken, so confused, so desperate for approval from his captors that he would say anything they asked. Simon began formal sessions, official witnesses present, questions carefully designed to build a legal case. Did your mother conspire with Austria against France? Yes. Did she waste the nation's treasury? Yes. Did she, and here came the accusation so vile that even Simon hesitated, did she do inappropriate things to you? Louis Charles, 8 years old, coached for weeks, threatened and beaten and starved into compliance, nodded. Yes. The witnesses wrote it down. Official testimony from Louis Charles Capet, formerly the Dauphin of France, now a tool of the revolution. They had their weapon. Now they just needed to deploy it. August 1st, 1793, 2 a.m. A pattern with the revolutionaries. They loved their midnight raids, their dramatic seizures, their theatrical cruelty performed when darkness made everything feel more sinister. Guards entered Marie Antoinette's chamber for the second time in a month, but this time they weren't taking her son. They were taking her. Transfer orders. Immediate. No goodbyes beyond what she could say while being physically dragged from the room. She had 60 seconds to embrace Marie-Thérèse, 60 seconds to memorize her daughter's face, her daughter's tears, her daughter's desperate grip. Then they pulled them apart. Marie-Thérèse screamed, begged, but she was 14, no match for armed revolutionary guards. Marie Antoinette didn't scream. She'd already screamed herself empty when they took Louis Charles. Now she just went silent, numb, hollow. They led her down the Temple Tower stairs, through corridors she'd walked 1,000 times, out into the Paris night, into a carriage. Destination, the Conciergerie. The prison known as the antechamber to death, the place where everyone went just before the guillotine.
The Conciergerie wasn't just a prison, it was a statement. This medieval fortress on the Ile de la Cité had been part of the old royal palace complex. Kings and queens had once ruled from these halls. Now it served a different purpose, holding those same aristocrats before their executions. The revolutionaries loved the irony. They called it the antechamber to the guillotine because nobody left the Conciergerie alive. Marie Antoinette arrived at 2:30 a.m. on August 2nd, 1793. She was registered as prisoner number 280, not former Queen of France, not Marie Antoinette, not even her birth name, Maria Antonia, just a number. They took her down narrow stone staircases, down and down until the air grew thick with moisture from the Seine River flowing directly beneath the prison. The damp seeped into everything, the walls, the air, the thin mattresses, the prisoner's lungs. Her cell measured 11 feet by 6 feet, barely bigger than a closet, a space so small you could touch both walls by extending your arms. One small barred window near the ceiling, but it faced a courtyard, not the outside world. No sunlight, no fresh air, just the constant dim light from oil lamps and the smell of river water mixed with human waste. A straw mattress on the floor, one thin blanket, a wooden chair, a small table, a screen in the corner for using the chamber pot, the only privacy they allowed her, and even that was barely privacy at all. Because of the guards. 2 guards, always 2, stationed inside her cell, not outside, inside, watching her every single second of every day for 76 days straight. When she changed her clothes, they watched. When she used the chamber pot behind the screen, they could hear everything, recorded everything. When she cried, and she cried often those first weeks, they noted it in their reports. When she slept, when she ate, when she stared at the walls trying to maintain her sanity, documented, analyzed, reported to the Committee of Public Safety. This wasn't imprisonment. This was systematic dehumanization. The Conciergerie processed thousands of prisoners in 1793, but Marie Antoinette received special treatment. Special in the worst possible way. Most prisoners at least had some privacy, some dignity. She had none. The guards changed in shifts, but their orders remained constant. Watch her, record everything, allow no privacy whatsoever. Some guards were cruel, making crude jokes about the fallen queen. Others were simply doing their jobs, uncomfortable but obedient. It didn't matter. The effect was the same. Marie Antoinette aged a decade in the first month. Her hair had already gone white after Louis XVI's execution. Now her face hollowed out. Her skin took on a grayish pallor from the constant dampness and lack of sunlight. Her hands trembled. She began hemorrhaging, likely uterine cancer, though no doctor would examine her properly. By September, she could barely stand without assistance. The dampness aggravated her illness. The stress accelerated it. The complete absence of privacy and dignity destroyed whatever health remained. But the physical deterioration was still not the worst part. The worst part was not knowing. She had no information about her children. Louis Charles was somewhere in this same city, possibly this same prison, but she didn't know where. She didn't know what they were doing to him. She didn't know that he'd been turned into a weapon aimed directly at her heart. Marie-Thérèse was still in the Temple Tower, now completely alone, a 14-year-old girl with both parents dead, her brother taken, her mother imprisoned. But Marie Antoinette couldn't write to her, couldn't send messages, couldn't even know for certain that her daughter was still alive. The not knowing was its own torture. August passed, then September, then early October. 70 days of sitting in that 11-foot by 6-foot cell, breathing damp air, watching the same guards' faces, hearing the same sounds of prisoners being taken out and never returning. The guards told her nothing. When she asked about her children, they ignored her. When she asked about her trial, because she knew a trial was coming, everyone who came to the Conciergerie got a trial before the guillotine. They stayed silent. The silence was calculated. Keep her isolated, uninformed, uncertain. Break down her mental defenses before the trial even began. Other prisoners occasionally managed to communicate with her, A few sympathetic guards looked the other way, messages smuggled on scraps of paper, whispers through walls. She learned fragments, that public opinion had turned savagely against her, that the Committee of Public Safety was building an elaborate case, that her execution was essentially predetermined. One visitor stood out, Rosalie Lamorlière, a young servant assigned to bring Marie Antoinette her meals. Rosalie later wrote about those days, about how the former queen maintained dignity despite everything, how she thanked Rosalie for each meal, even though the food was barely edible, how she asked about Rosalie's family and showed interest in this young woman's life even while her own was ending. Small moments of humanity in an inhumane situation. But mostly Marie Antoinette was alone with her thoughts and her watchers. 76 days of contemplating death, mourning her children, remembering her life before the revolution when the world made sense. She thought about Austria, probably, about arriving in France at 14 to marry the awkward young Dauphin who would become Louis XVI, about learning French, about struggling to produce an heir, about finally having children after 8 years of marriage, about Versailles and its elaborate rituals, about the diamond necklace affair that destroyed her reputation even though she was innocent, about the bread shortages and angry crowds, and the day in October 1789 when the mob marched on Versailles and everything changed forever. She thought about Louis XVI, certainly, about his execution, about whether he'd been frightened on the scaffold, about whether death had been quick. She thought about her children constantly, Louis Charles and Marie Thérèse, wondered if they remembered her, wondered if they hated her for failing to protect them, wondered if she'd ever hold them again, even though she knew the answer. She didn't know that in just days she would face her son's testimony. She didn't know that the accusations would be so vile that even hardened revolutionaries would feel uncomfortable. She didn't know that everything she'd endured so far was just preparation for the final cruelty. October 12th, 1793, day 72 in the Conciergerie. Guards entered her cell with formal notification. Her trial would begin in 2 days.
October 14th, 1793. They came for Marie Antoinette before sunrise. No breakfast, no preparation. Just guards pulling her from sleep and marching her through the Conciergerie's corridors to the Palais de Justice next door. The Revolutionary Tribunal courtroom was packed, hundreds of spectators crammed into every available space, standing room only, everyone wanting to witness the trial of the century, the former Queen of France, finally answering for her crimes. Marie Antoinette entered wearing the same black mourning dress she'd worn for months. Her white hair was uncombed. The guards had denied her time to prepare. She looked decades older than her 37 years. Hollow cheeks, trembling hands, the physical manifestation of 76 days in hell. But when she sat in the defendant's chair, something remarkable happened. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, found some reserve of dignity she'd been saving for exactly this moment. The prosecutor was Antoine Quentin Fouquier-Tinville, a man who'd sent thousands to the guillotine and would send thousands more. He had a thick file of charges prepared. This wouldn't be a short trial. It lasted 16 hours. 16 hours straight. No breaks, no food, no water. This woman who could barely stand from illness was forced to remain upright while they hurled accusations like weapons. Charge 1. High treason. Conspiring with foreign powers, specifically Austria, her birth country, against France. They had letters, they claimed, evidence of communications with her brother, the Austrian emperor. Marie Antoinette's response was calm, measured. Yes, she'd written to her family. What sister wouldn't? But conspiracy? Plans to undermine France? She denied everything. Charge 2. Depleting the French treasury. The old accusation that she'd spent wildly on clothes, jewelry, parties, while French citizens starved. Madame Deficit, they'd called her for years. Again, she responded with dignity. The spending at Versailles was traditional, expected of royalty, not her personal choice. Much of what was attributed to her was exaggerated or false. Hours passed. More charges, more accusations. The crowd jeered, called her whore, traitor, Austrian bitch. The judges did nothing to stop them. By hour 8, Marie Antoinette was visibly weakening, swaying in her chair. But the tribunal showed no mercy. They had one more charge to present, the big one, the accusation they'd spent months preparing. Fouquier-Tinville stood. Even he seemed uncomfortable with what came next. The charge? Incest. Sexual abuse of her own son, Louis Charles. The courtroom erupted. Even in revolutionary France, even among those who despised the monarchy, this accusation crossed a line. This was too far. But they had testimony, official testimony, from Louis Charles himself. They read it aloud. The coached words of an 8-year-old boy, tortured and brainwashed for months, saying horrific things about his mother, describing acts that probably never happened, using language that no child would naturally use, reciting the script that Antoine Simon had beaten into him. Marie Antoinette sat frozen. For 16 hours she'd maintained composure, but this broke her. They'd weaponized her son, used the child she'd fought to protect, turned him into the instrument of her destruction. The prosecutor demanded her response. For several minutes, she said nothing, just stared ahead, processing the magnitude of what they had done, how they had taken her 8-year-old son and destroyed him to destroy her. Then she stood. Her voice, weak from months of illness, somehow filled the courtroom. If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to answer such a charge laid against a mother. She turned to face the crowd, looked directly at the women in the audience. I appeal to all mothers here present. Is it true? For one moment, just one, the courtroom fell silent. Because she'd done something brilliant. She'd reminded them that beneath the politics, beneath the revolution, beneath all the ideology and hatred, she was a mother, just like them. And what mother wouldn't be destroyed by such an accusation? Some women in the crowd began crying. Even some revolutionaries looked uncomfortable. One juror was later reported to have said the accusation was a strategic mistake. It made people sympathize with her. But sympathy wouldn't save her. The trial continued until midnight, 16 hours of relentless prosecution. Finally, they sent the jury to deliberate. The verdict came at 4 a.m. on October 16th. Guilty on all charges. Sentence: death by guillotine. Execution: today. Marie Antoinette had hours to live. They returned her to her cell. She asked for paper and ink. In the early morning darkness, by candlelight, she wrote one final letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. The letter was heartbreaking. She wrote about her children, about the greatest sorrows of dying being forever separated from them. She wrote that she was calm, ready to die, that her only regret was leaving her poor, dear children. She begged Elizabeth to care for them, to tell them their mother loved them until the very end. She signed it,
folded it, gave it to the guards. The letter never reached anyone. It was intercepted, filed away, forgotten, her final words to her family, lost. At 7 a.m., they came to prepare her, cut her hair short for the guillotine, bound her hands behind her back with rough rope that cut into her wrists, put a white bonnet on her head, the uniform of the condemned. One small dignity, they let her change clothes behind a screen, a simple white dress. She was hemorrhaging badly by then, bleeding through the fabric, but she made no complaint. At 11 a.m., they led her from her cell for the last time. Outside, an open cart waited. Not the closed carriage they had given Louis XVI, an open cart so the crowds lining the route could see her, mock her, throw things at her. The journey from the Conciergerie to the Place de la Révolution took over an hour. The crowd was massive, tens of thousands of Parisians turning out to watch the former queen's final ride. Some were angry, screaming insults. Others were silent, watching with mixed emotions. Marie Antoinette sat perfectly still in the cart, eyes forward, no tears, no begging. Whatever else history would say about her, she faced death with courage. At 12 p.m., the cart arrived at the Place de la Révolution, the same square where her husband had died 9 months earlier, the same guillotine. She climbed down from the cart. Her legs were weak from illness and months of imprisonment. She stumbled slightly, climbing the scaffold steps. As she steadied herself, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. Even then, even at the moment of her death, her final words were an apology. "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Dignity until the absolute end. They positioned her under the blade. The crowd fell silent. Even those who hated her most seemed to recognize the gravity of the moment. 12:15 p.m., October 16, 1793. The blade fell. Marie Antoinette was dead at 37 years old. The crowd erupted in cheers, hats thrown in the air, people celebrating in the streets. The Austrian woman was finally gone. Her body and severed head were thrown into an unmarked grave in the Madeleine Cemetery. No ceremony, no respect, just another corpse from the revolution's insatiable appetite for blood. Her daughter Marie-Thérèse remained imprisoned for another 2 years before finally being released. She survived, but lived the rest of her life haunted by that final embrace with her mother on August 1st. Her son Louis-Charles died on June 8, 1795, still imprisoned, still isolated. The torture and neglect had destroyed his health. He died at 10 years old, covered in sores, suffering from tuberculosis, in the arms of a jailer who probably didn't even know his real name. 76 days. That's how long they kept Marie Antoinette alive in the Conciergerie. 76 days of psychological...
This is the story they don't tell in textbooks. When you learn about Marie Antoinette in school, you get the highlights. Let them eat cake, a quote she never actually said. The extravagant queen who lived in luxury while France starved. The guillotine. The end. But they leave out the 76 days in the conciliary. They leave out the systematic psychological torture. They leave out what they did to an 8-year-old boy to berate her mother. Because here's what Marie Antoinette's execution really reveals. It wasn't about justice, it was about revenge. The French Revolution started with noble ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity. But by October 1793, those ideals had twisted into something unrecognizable. The revolutionaries didn't just want to end the monarchy, they wanted to humiliate it, destroy it,
make examples so terrifying that no one would ever challenge their power again. They succeeded, but at what cost? Louis Charles died at 10 years old, destroyed by the very revolution that claimed to fight for children like him. Marie Thérèse lived, but spent her entire life traumatized by memories of that final embrace with her mother. And Marie Antoinette herself, regardless of what you think about her politics, her spending, her failures as a queen, died as a mother who'd had everything ripped away piece by piece. That's the pattern history keeps repeating. Revolutions devour their enemies, then they devour their principles, then they devour themselves. We see it in the French Reign of Terror. We see it in Stalin's purges. We see it in the Cultural Revolution. We see it every time people convince themselves that the ends justify the means, that cruelty is acceptable if it serves the right cause. Marie Antoinette wasn't innocent of everything, but what they did to her, and especially what they did to her children, crossed every line of human decency. 76 days. Remember that number, because that's how long it takes to destroy a human being when you use the thing they love most as a weapon. If you want to understand how far humanity can fall when we forget compassion, when we choose vengeance over justice, when we treat our enemies as less than human, this is it. Subscribe to never forget these lessons, because the darkest parts of history aren't just about what happened. They're warnings about what we're capable of doing again. What other historical villains suffered fates worse than we remember? Comment below. This story connects to something even darker: what happened to the other French royal children during the Terror. That's next.